Well, welcome everyone. It is wonderful to be in this virtual space with all of you this afternoon. My name is Emily Jenzik, and I'm the director of the Ignatian Spirituality Center in Seattle. We are located on Capitol Hill in the complex of St. Joseph's Church and School. And the ISC, as we like to call ourselves, is a nonprofit that is committed to nurturing compassion, healing, and justice by engaging spiritual seekers in deepening their connection to God, self, and others. We host retreats, workshops, and a spiritual direction matching service, which I'll talk about at the end of our session together. We are honored to be part of your professional development day and say thank you to all of you for being with us this afternoon. We hope that it is a space where you're able to take a few deep breaths together and some time of prayer and reflection, personally and with one another. The topic for this session is spirituality for educators, strengthening spiritual practices and exploring shared values of Catholic school educators. So I'm just going to talk about a few of the logistics of our session together. We will be recording the presentation material of this session, but we will stop the recording when there's any personal sharing or small group conversations. We ask that you remain muted throughout, and most of you have done so already, so thank you. Just please change your name on Zoom to your full name and your school affiliation. The chat will be open throughout, so feel free to ask questions there, and there will also be a few times throughout the afternoon where Matt will stop and ask if anyone has any questions throughout. So finally, I would love to introduce Dr. Matt Barmore. Matt is a longtime Catholic educator and retreat facilitator. He is currently on the faculty at Seattle Prep as a teacher and director of adult faith formation. I'm so grateful for Matt's presence here today and look forward to this very nourishing afternoon together. I'll turn it over to you, Matt.
Great, thanks, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you had a wonderful morning session in whatever it was that you were participating in. I've really looked forward to this day. It kind of brings together two kind of entities or loves of my life, right? The Ignatian Spirituality Center, which I worked in for a while, and they put on such great programs. And when they asked me to do this presentation, I jumped at the chance because I feel like I've given retreats and done some other work for the Ignatian Spirituality Center, but today in this, I get to talk to my peeps, other teachers that do the same thing. So we have some things in common. I will say this, I think this comes at a good time, this notion of spirituality for educators. If you're like me, I don't know how this translates to the grade schools, but I know in the high schools that I've worked in before, February is I call them the dog days. I think the school year's got 2 periods of dog days. One is between Thanksgiving and Christmas, where everybody is just waiting for Christmas to get there. And the other is in February, right? Like Christmas seems like so long ago and Easter is nowhere in sight that we can kind of get caught up in the dull and the gray and the rain and etc. So hopefully, I'm hopeful that our time together today gives you some tools, some ideas that will help with your spiritual life in general, will help with your spiritual life as a teacher, and maybe will help you a little bit get through the dog days. So let's begin with a prayer. I found it's called the Educators' Creed, and I've adapted it a little bit, but it fits. So I'm going to share that with us this morning as a morning prayer. So I just ask that take a moment, recognize God's presence with us this afternoon. God's presence with us in all that we do and everyone with whom we come in contact. This is the Educators' Creed. I believe that my students are vulnerable and scared. I believe that they're often pressured and confused, that they're alienated and sometimes lack positive role models. But I also believe my students have courage and integrity. I believe they are our hope, our promise, and our future. I believe that they are wonderful and beautiful. I believe that what they need most are educators like us who love and challenge them. They need us to be strong enough to be vulnerable, wise enough to challenge them, and honest enough to let them know how precious they are. I believe they need educators who are willing to share our own faith journeys, complete with joys, sorrows, and richness. They need educators who are courageous enough to speak the truth, no matter how difficult that may be. And finally, I believe they need educators who are committed to living out Jesus' greatest commandment, to love one another, especially our students. Amen. Emily told you a little bit about me. Let me fill in some gaps, but I'm going to do that after I get a little information from you. So I'm going to project a Mentimeter. I like Mentimeter. I know most of you have probably used it. I find it fascinating. I used to poll my students all the time. I teach a Shakespeare class and say, how many of you have heard of Romeo and Juliet by a show of hands? Or how many have read Macbeth by a show of hands? And it's like, oh yeah. But as soon as you use something that technology, I think they feel like they're playing a video game and they're really into it. So let me share my screen and access this Mentimeter for you. Okay. So you can, on your own device or on your phone or anything you like, if you go to menti.com and use the code 8272-2119, that will pop up this first question. I'm just going to ask you two questions. First one is, how long have you been a teacher? The code again is 8272-2119. And we'll see who we have with us today.
I'm getting a message that says that code can't be found.
Okay. There are others that don't seem to be having that trouble. I'm really sorry about that.
Maybe let me try it again.
Okay. 8272
8272
2119.
Okay. May it just be me.
Oh, trust me, I tried this in the first one. I kind of, as often as I've used this, I kind of screwed it up. So it's we're going to blame it on the Mentimeter. That just is always, that's easier, I think. All right, I'll wait just about another 30 seconds, see if we get some more in here. We've got 21, 24, 25. Yeah, there we go. Look at this. So this is interesting. Our morning session had a lot of 0 to 5. The one who's over 40 years in teaching, I will not ask you to identify yourself. I'll just tell you you're my hero. I think that's awesome. I'm in my 40th year. I think that's why I arranged the years the way I did, so that I wouldn't be. I thought, well, there are people that have been here longer than I have. They'll be able to fill in that last column. Okay, let me see if I can move to the next question. So that's how long have you been a teacher? We've got really a nice distribution of that. Okay, Mentimeter. This is what it did to me this morning. It's not going to let me. Why I've not had this problem before, but let's see if we can move to the next question. I'll stop sharing. Go to Mentimeter, move it to the next question, move it to the next question. I'll go back and share my screen again and see if it allows you to do this. All right. What's the highlight of your typical week? In the morning session, this is I could not get this slide to show up on people's screens. So. Okay. All right. We've got 25. So there might be a couple that haven't been able to, but that's good. I can't tell you how encouraging that is, right? You're really sitting in a faculty meeting. All right. Okay. Let me stop sharing. Let me share a little bit about myself. As I mentioned, so I'm in my 40th year. And I've spent my time all in Jesuit education. I've been to 2 other schools, love a lot of the charisms that exist in other schools. I just happen to be one who's been with the Jesuits. I was 15 years at St. Ignatius in San Francisco. Before in 1997, I came up to Seattle to be the principal at Seattle Prep. I did that for 8 years, and then I promoted myself back into the classroom. I wanted to get back into the classroom, and I happened to know the guy who was hiring teachers. So I put in a good word for myself, and I hired myself back into the classroom. 3 years later, the school was going through some things, and they asked me if I would step back into the principal's role, and I said reluctantly, I said yes, I will, but only for a year. And then 4 years later, I promoted myself back into the classroom again. I am a slow learner. So now I teach. I'm part-time. I teach part-time. I'm an English teacher, and I'm the director of Ignatian formation, or adult faith formation, for the school. I do the adult programming. And I absolutely love it. I share that information with you because I need to share with you probably the biggest takeaway for having been in the principal's office for me was a greater appreciation for the impact that good teachers have on students' lives. Like, I've always known that it's not only an incredibly wonderful profession, but an important one. But it wasn't until I was in the principal's office. So, I would go, I'd go visit teachers, I'd go observe teachers, and I saw just really wonderful teaching going on. But as a principal, I always think of that as that's the view from 30,000 feet. Then I would hear in other conversations, students talk about the experience they had in someone's class and how awesome that was. Or at the end of the year, I'd have a parent write me a letter or an email about the impact that an individual teacher had on their son or daughter's life. We have, I'm sure this is true for all schools. We have alums that come back and visit us, and for us, it's, around Thanksgiving and Christmas in their first year back from being in college, and they'll come visit the campus and they want to touch base with their favorite teachers, and that's really nice. But it's really those that come back to their reunions, their 10-year reunion, their 15, 20-year reunion. And someone will walk up and say, "Hey, Mr. Barmore, does so-and-so still teach here?" And it really, whether the answer is yes or no, I'll say, "Oh, did you have them as a teacher?" And very often the conversation is, "Oh yeah, I had them as a teacher. They were a great teacher. But really, what they did for me was blank." And it's something far beyond what goes on in the classroom. And I think, for maybe other teachers are aware of this. For me, it just highlighted the fact that what we do is not only important, but it's really sacred. And that's going to be one of the things that we focus on in this session. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen. This is Spirituality for Educators, right? How our faith lives inform our professional lives. Thank you again to the ISC for the invitation to put this on, to be a part of this. Okay, and here are the goals. We want to recognize and celebrate the sacred work that we do as educators. I don't walk into my classroom and think the work that I'm doing here is sacred. It's just not a part of my awareness or consciousness. but it's not uncommon for me to walk into a classroom, especially if I'm not in a, whatever is going on in life, right, where I'm not in a particularly good mood, and have a student brighten my day with a simple hello, or to have an interaction with a student after which I think, you know what, this work really is sacred. Okay. So I have that little image there. Teachers are angels in disguise. I think that's really true. So that's one goal. A second goal is I'd like to walk you through a couple of very specific spiritual practices that have helped me as a teacher. I think they're valuable to people who aren't teachers, but I think specifically for teachers, they can be really helpful. They can help you throughout the year, maybe even especially during the dog days of February. And then finally, as teachers, we're often isolated, right? We're in our classrooms, we're with the wonderful people, but in my case, they're 15 years old or 18 years old, right? In others, they're 6 or 7 or 9 years old. We don't have as many opportunities to be with one another as might be helpful. Okay, so that's another goal, is to be able to connect and share experiences with one another. And in a session like this, even some people who are at other schools, some people that we didn't know. Okay, the agenda, there are 3 sessions in this 3-hour-long block. Each one is shorter than the one before it, and we probably will finish a little bit before 3:30. The first one is the work we do is sacred. We want to explore what that means, what that looks like in our classes, why that's important, etc. And the prayer that we'll be experiencing is what St. Ignatius, the founder of the Jesuits, calls an examen. The second session is identifying our angels. Our angels are those people in our lives that invite and encourage us to be our best selves, right? And I think it's helpful to identify who those people are. Oftentimes they're students. And then third is a session about a particular form of prayer that is, I think, really helpful for educators. Okay, so that's our agenda. Again, the first part of this, the work that we do is sacred. And I'm going to begin here with St. Ignatius has, at the beginning of the exercises, he has retreatants reflect on this notion that in the first principle and foundation, it's the kind of the underpinnings through which one experiences this retreat. And the first line of the first principle and foundation, I find wonderful. For me, it's really eye-opening. And it goes like this: the goal of our lives is to live with God forever. I highlighted in red 2 words there. Like, I'm an English teacher, so kind of words matter. And the 2 words I underlined are is and forever. I'll talk a little bit about forever. The goal of our lives is to live with God forever. What resonates with me about that is that's not our goal to live with God after we pass from this life to the next life. Ignatius believed that God exists in our lives, in everything that we do. And we have an opportunity to be with that God, with the divine, always. And sometimes I don't filter my life through that lens. So it's good to be reminded. Okay. And the other is, our goal of our lives is to live with God forever. There isn't a should be. It does say the goal of our lives should be. And if it isn't, I need to correct something. Ignatius believed that goal, to be in touch with the divinity that's within us, to be with God, exists innately in all of us. One of his reflections is on Psalm 39. There's a great line in there: "You knit me in my mother's womb." And I love to think of this wonderful and divine tapestry that is who I am, and that I have an access to tap into. Okay, I just finished a novel by Amor Towles called The Lincoln Highway. I would highly recommend it. I would also highly recommend his book, A Gentleman in Moscow. There's a really good line in The Lincoln Highway that I think expresses Psalm 139 in in terms that are more accessible, at least for me today, right? One of his characters says, I do believe that the good Lord has a mission for each and every one of us, a mission that is forgiving of our weaknesses, tailored to our strengths, and designed with only us in mind. All right. For us, clearly, part of that mission is to teach. And the character goes on, but maybe he doesn't come knocking on our door and present it to us all frosted like a cake. Maybe, just maybe, what he requires of us, what he expects of us, what he hopes for us is that, like his only begotten son, we'll go out into the world and find it for ourselves. And I'm guessing that that rings some truth for each of us, right? That throughout the course of our lives, what we have discovered, what we have found great life in, is that we've been called to teach. That to be a teacher is part of that tapestry, the divine tapestry that exists within each of us. Okay, so I want to acknowledge that, and then take a look at, okay, that's great, that sounds good. What does that mean in the classroom? Okay, so what is it that we do? Well, we teach. And I mean that in the broadest sense. I think everyone that works in the building, everyone that's associated with students is a teacher, okay? And they teach not only a subject, but probably more importantly, they teach a little bit about themselves. Each one of us teaches the students that we have in class how it is that we go about living our lives. Why do we teach? That's not why personally are we drawn to teaching, but why do teachers in Catholic schools teach? What's their ultimate goal? And I often say it's not about information. I'm an English teacher, but my job really isn't to teach about English. That's part of it, right? My job's not about the information, it's about the formation and transformation. So what I used to talk to parents about, who were, prospective parents looking at whether they wanted to send their kids to prep, is I would always say, the reason we have a threefold reason for opening our doors each morning. It really isn't to get your kid into a great college. That might be a byproduct of they're attending our school. But here's our goal, or here's our mission. We want to help students identify the gifts that they've been given, right? What's their part of their tapestry. Part of helping them understand the gifts they've been given is, and I call it reality therapy, is helping them understand the gift they don't have, the gifts they haven't been given. Nobody's really, really, really great at everything. So that's number one. Number two is help them develop those gifts to their fullest potential. And I think that's why Catholic schools have such a high bar. That's why we hold students, accountable to such a high degree, is we want them to take the gifts that they've been given and develop them to their utmost. And that's because of the third thing that we're in the business of, right? And that is, we want to help students begin to ask the question, what am I being called to do with my gifts? Like that's a key question for students. How do they become agents of change in a world that cries out for change? And then the last is how, cura personalis. I use the term cura personalis. It's used in Jesuit schools. It's a Latin phrase. All it really means is, how do we care for our students, right? Cura personalis means care and concern for the individual. I put there in loco parentis because if you go into school administration, you take a law class, and the law class kind of teaches you, well, what legal standard are you held to? And it's called in loco parentis, which just means in the place of the parent. And all that means is, we're expected, if, for example, we're in a classroom that has a table that has a lot of glassware on it for whatever reason, they're vases or it's an art project or whatever. If that table gets knocked over and all of the glass falls to the ground and breaks, it would be expected of us not to say, okay, students, I'd like everybody to get up and walk over and pick up the shards of glass that you can and throw them away. That's not in loco parentis. We'd be held to a higher standard of safety. One of my favorite images is when I'm driving along and I see a group of really young students. They might be in first grade and they're out on some sort of field trip and they're all tethered. Let's be real, they're all leashed together, right, around the hip, and that's so that they don't run out into the street. It's a wonderful practice. I wish that these tethers existed when my kids were little, because I was forever losing my son when he was little. But that's in loco parentis, right? Cura personalis calls us to a kind of a higher level, right? Not just to keep them safe, but to actually care for them, to love them, right? Look at that wonderful picture. That's a picture of a group of students. They're happy, et cetera, et cetera. It's easy to love and show care and concern for those students. A little bit harder with some of our students, not students in general, but some of the student behaviors that we are privy to on a daily basis, right? So what's this cura personalis look like? You know, in its easiest form, probably most, what would I say, most available form, it's helping a student who doesn't understand something, right? A student who's frustrated or is not picking up on an idea or a lesson or a concept or a way to do a problem. We take the time to help them do that. That's cura personalis. Being a warm presence, an ally, a supporter, an empathetic ear. That has nothing to do with English for me, right? But for example, I had a student just this past week who came up to me before class and he said, Mr. Bormer, I have to tell you, if I seem like I'm not paying attention when you're talking about the book today, it's because my aunt just passed away. And I thought, wow, like how quickly can I let this young man know that I'm not worried about what he knows about this book, but what does he need from me relative to his aunt having passed? It was so clear within about 10 seconds that he just really, really wanted to talk about his aunt. He wanted someone to share his experiences about his aunt or his story about his aunt. He told me that she passed away that morning at 4 o'clock in the hospital. She said, yeah, the whole family was with her in the hospital room when she passed away. So this is a student who lost an aunt at 4 in the morning. And as at 7:45, he's at school. He's someone that needed that interpersonal contact at that time, right? So he went on to tell me, you know, what she meant to him, how she was a part of his life, you know, how it's affected his parents, et cetera, et cetera. Being present to that student instead of being concerned about, do you know the main conflict in whatever work we were talking about? That's cura personalis. Providing a kind word, just in passing. We had a graded discussion in class about 2 weeks ago, and there's a student who doesn't usually share much in class. She did really, really well. Volunteered information, had evidence from the text, et cetera. And as she was walking out, I just said, Quinn, you did a really great job today. It was really nice to see that. And she stopped for a second and she said, thank you. That really means a lot to me. And I thought, wow, I wouldn't have thought that those words would have meant that to her, but that's caring for her. And she just happened to show or acknowledge that was something that was important to her. Asking students how they're doing. I make a point to be kind of at the door as students walk in and just ask, how are you doing? And 99 times out of 100, I'm doing fine. How are you? I'm doing fine. How are you? And once in a while, someone will stop and say, well, not so good. And you're, again, involved in a conversation that shows them, I care about you. And I think that's really important in our schools. Like, I think learning comes from dissonance, right? When we can create a situation where students don't know and are a little bit uncomfortable about that, that's really good. But it's only successful, it only works if we do that in an environment where they know they're loved. And then finally, I put in here just laughing with. Students love to see that we're human and enjoy those kinds of interactions with us. Okay. So before we go any further, I'm going to stop sharing and I'm just going to ask, if anybody's got a comment or a question, feel free to throw it in the chat and or raise a hand. We can probably see that in participants, and I'm happy to answer it. Otherwise, the next thing I will do is go into a prayer practice that I think takes into it kind of puts into play this notion of cura personalis and the sacredness of what we do. Okay. I'll go back to my presentation. And we're gonna do an exam on what Ignatius calls an examen. But before I do that, I want to talk a little bit about, just provide a little context for a lot of the different kind of prayers that Ignatius used and are a part of the spiritual exercises involve the imagination. Ignatius was really big on the belief that if we can put that rational side of our brain aside for just a little bit, that side of our brain that we operate with, I won't say exclusively, but very, very often, if we can put that part of our brain aside and tap into the imagination, God oftentimes works through that imagination. And he believed this because it was a part of his own life. After having been injured in a battle, but this is before he was, by his own admission, before he was a spiritual person in even a little bit. He got injured, and while he was recuperating, he would dream of, oh boy, when I get healthy again and I get back into battle, I'm going to be the best soldier. I'm going to defeat people. I'm going to, and he just had a tremendous imagination. And he used it for dreaming about how he could be great. As he was recuperating, and the only text he could find was the Life of the Saints, or one of the texts he could find, he began imagining what it would be like to be one of these saints. And he found great consolation in that. Consolation that he didn't find when he was thinking about being an awesome soldier. He found that those imaginings, the thrill of those left him shortly after he finished imagining it. So he used this imagination as a way to tap into, as a way to provide access to the Holy Spirit in his life. Okay. And he participated in, or he often used what he called this examen, or the examination of consciousness. Okay. And simply it's an opportunity where you take time to reflect back on God's presence in our life over that period of time. Many people do the examen as a daily practice. Like at the end of the day, I'm going to look back on my day and kind of review that period of time and seeing, well, where did I feel God's presence? Okay. Ignatius was kind of OCD in this manner. He would, like every couple of hours, he would stop and evaluate the previous couple of hours. I'm gonna let you know of what the steps are in an examen, and then I'm going to lead you through one that's I've just organized it differently. It's a little bit differently, a little more tailored to teachers. Okay, there are as many different processes of the examen as there are days in a week. Okay, but most of them have there's a 5-step sequence. This is not the original Ignatius one, but it's one I use most often. And step number 1 is to give thanks. Like at the end of the day, I will review my day, like what happened when I got up, what, blah, blah, and I'll think about what are the things I'm thankful for. St. Ignatius believed that all prayer begins with thanks. and all thanks is a form of prayer. So it could be something as simple as I was grateful for the fact that I woke up and I was safe and I was warm and I had availability to me to have breakfast. Okay, but I'd walk through the day, often thankful for, hey, thanks for that student to pick up my spirits. I walked into class, I wasn't in a good mood, and she said, "How are you doing today, Mr. Barmore?" And that just seemed to make my day. So number one is I walk through my day using my imagination. I'm not creating something new. I'm reimagining what happened, and I give thanks. In the second step of the examen, I ask, where did I experience God? Now that question is hard for me to access if I don't make it practical, right? So what Ignatius means by that is, where did I experience joy? Where did I experience that deep-seated sense of contentment in my life? What Ignatius calls consolation. And oftentimes that is, like my example of the student who talked to me about his aunt passing. I was incredibly sad for his aunt's passing. When I thought about the interaction I had with this student, it gave me great joy, great consolation, both to have had the conversation and possibly to have been helpful to the student, but also to have a relationship with a student where he felt like he could share that with me. Okay, so that's as I look for those moments, and I look for those moments during the the period of the day. Okay, but also you begin to learn patterns. Like, for example, when I was in the principal's office and I realized in my examen, I would oftentimes think to myself, wow, where I felt the consolation, kind of the highlight of my days, were when I was in the teaching, because I always taught a class when I was a principal. And my wife finally said to me one day, Matt, if all of this consolation and joy you find in the classroom, would you rather do that full time than be the principal? And I thought, well, that makes sense. I am a slow learner. I thought, well, that makes sense. Yeah, okay. So that's what I decided to do. The third step is I asked myself, when was I distant from God? And similarly, I walk through the day and I identify my behaviors, my interactions with people, and even my thoughts. And I ask, when was I not my best self? When was I not acting out of that divine tapestry that exists within me? When did I feel most distant from my best self? And if I'm thinking about that as a teacher, that's oftentimes things like, when did I react curtly to a student when they were doing something I just didn't like what they were doing, right? When did I not give student sufficient time when they needed me to work on a problem, to discuss something with them, etc.? And identifying those, Ignatius was big on, like, we don't identify those to beat ourselves up, to say, oh, I'm not very good. It's to identify so as to be able to improve upon. Okay. And the fourth thing, do I need to reconcile with someone? And I've actually done this with students. If I think through, boy, I should have handled that situation differently yesterday, I'll go to the student and say, you know what, I'm really sorry. I should have handled that differently. I should have done this instead. Or can we talk about what happened, right? So that you're aware of, what it was that you did that set me off. And I can explain to you how we expect different behavior from you in the future, knowing that hopefully you'll expect different behavior from me. And then finally, I ask for God's help as I look ahead. And oftentimes this is, again, in the form of imagination. Picture yourself going into the next day sent by God. Okay. I find that can be a really, really helpful part in that. Okay. All right. So here's what I would like to do at this point. I'm going to stop sharing and I'm going to lead you through an examen, pardon me. I'm going to walk you through this examen. And this is geared towards your role as a teacher, as an educator. And I would just suggest this. You're welcome while I do this. If you feel self-conscious about the fact that you have your video on, you can turn your video off while I'm doing this examine. I'm going to invite you to close your eyes once we get started. I find that I look at the imagination as one of the senses that we have. And so if I close off one sense, my eyes, it opens up my other sense, my imagination. Okay. So I'm just going to invite you to get into a comfortable space. Be relaxed. Find that position that allows you to be both relaxed and attentive. I invite you to close your eyes and take a couple of deep breaths. And as you exhale, breathe out the busyness of your daily life. All of the noise and the clatter that we live with every day. Breathe out any anxiety that you may be experiencing, any worries. In the first part of this examine, I'm going to invite you to think back on the week that you've just had at school, the classes that you've taught, the interactions that you've had with colleagues, students, maybe even parents. And as you do that, identify one or two specific experiences that you had with students that filled you with joy. And take a couple of minutes and see if you can walk through the week and identify those one or two moments, experiences. Maybe your experience is of a student simply smiling, bringing a bright spot into an otherwise dark day for you. Maybe you had a student make a breakthrough in a class that you were teaching, or maybe you had a good laugh with a student before or after class, or maybe even during class. Whatever the experience, as you replay it in your imagination, try to relive it in such a way as to experience that joy all over again. Take a moment to give thanks for the moment or moments that you're recalling, and be mindful that as teachers, we have moments like this every day. Be mindful too that when we experience this joy, God rejoices with us. God loves nothing better than to see us joy-filled, to watch us living out our own personal tapestry, holy tapestry. I'm going to shift gears in the second part of this examen and invite you to call to mind one of your students who is struggling. Maybe they struggle to understand the material. Maybe they're going through a difficult situation at home. Maybe they struggle in your class or in your school because they feel like they don't fit in. They feel isolated. Take a moment to call that student to mind and to simply wish them well. It's probably the oldest form of prayer we have. As you think about and pray for the student, be aware of how the student and their situation move from your mind to your heart. That's really where our cura personalis work emanates from. And again, simply wish them well. The final part of this examen invites you to look forward. Imagine yourself going into your classroom next week, sent by God. Not to be anybody that you're not, but maybe to be the best you that you can be. What's that look like? How do you interact with students? What do you feel as you interact with them? I think it's good to be reminded that each day we are sent forth into the world, into our classrooms by God. Comforted by the fact that we are with God, charged with being for God, and empowered by the notion that we are of God. Okay, I'm going to invite you back into our session. I'm going to have you break up into small groups in just a little bit and have a conversation about a couple of questions that I will provide you with. But I thought before I do that, does anybody have a question about the examen, the use of imagination in prayer? Does anybody have a comment that they'd like to make about their experience with the examen?
I just want to say I think we always have students in mind that are troubled or need help, and it's kind of nice to actually take some time to focus on a student or students and bring them to mind and specifically pray for them.
I think that's a great point. Thank you, Jennifer. It's interesting. I have a sophomore class that we do a prayer at the beginning of class. So we're on a block schedule, so we've got 80-minute classes, and we take about 4 or 5 minutes each day. And most of the time we do a prayer out of a little prayer book that offers a little story, a reflection question, and they write in their journal. But not too long into the school year, I start them with an examen, and I usually give them a 3-part examen just like this. And I tell them, if you do this 10 days in a row, it will change you. It's not earth shattering, but it does change the way you look at the world, the way you view your experiences in the world. And students love this. I mean, they'll come in on Thursday. It's usually examine Thursday. They'll come in on Thursday. Are we doing the examen today? Are we doing the examen today? And if I happen to forget, or I say, all right, pull out your prayer journal, which is the sign that I'm using the little book, they go, no, 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 no. Today's the examen day. Today's the examen day. I think part of it is they love the opportunity to stop and go inward, right? And they do, like when I introduce that second question, it's oftentimes think of somebody. It might be somebody you know, but it also might be that person that's on the off ramp of I-5 that's got the sign that says, anything helps, and just hold them in. And they write in their journals, and in the longer reflection exercises, oftentimes about how they feel about wishing someone else well. And again, whether it's somebody they know or not. So yeah, good. Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'm going to go back to. Here are some questions. We're going to put you into groups for probably about 13, 15 minutes. And I will put these questions in the chat. Okay. The idea is really just to prime the pump. Would love for you to talk with one another about whatever in this first session resonated with you. Don't feel the need to answer all of these questions. If one of them strikes your fancy, you can stick with it. In what ways does your teaching make you feel like you're living out your call, your purpose? That I love the image of the tapestry within. What makes you feel most fulfilled about what you do? What reminds you that what you do is sacred? What are the little things that remind you that what you do with the students you come in contact with really is sacred? The second one is, how do you show cura personalis to students, to colleagues? I think sometimes it's really helpful to write that we treat one another with that same care and concern. How do you see others in your school reflecting this notion? Okay. So those are the questions. Let me quickly, I will put them in the chat so that you can look at them again. I've a question about would I mind sharing. I'm happy to share anything I've got with you. Some of the things that I have are like from a text, right? So I could give you I might be able to give you a reference to it. Most of it is stuff that I've created, recreated, or adapted. I'm more than happy to share it with you at the end of our time together. I'm going to give you my email address, and just send me an email and let me know what you want, and I will put it together and send you copies of what I have. Okay. I will say this: if the question is specifically about the examen, there are people who are far better at this than I, who've created some adaptations for the examen for students. I've found a one that works with sophomores really well. I've done a couple of presentations at grade schools where the teachers there have come up with an examen format that works really well for and they've actually adapted it for each of the different grade levels. So I could put you in touch with people and or schools that have done that. But yeah, okay. Okay. Emily, would you put them in groups and send them to wonderful conversations for about the next 14 minutes? And back up. Those are our reflection questions. Identifying our angels is the second session. This session is shorter than the first, and the third is shorter still. But one of the things I want to say about that is, our angels are just those people that invite us to be. They invite us and they draw out of us our best selves, right? And I think of that in terms of, like, for me, I don't resonate with kind of this image of angel. This image of angel more so. Much more so, right? Someone young that's having fun in the world, etc. And I get a kick out of this one as well. In this particular session, I'm going to introduce the prayer experience first, and then kind of try to frame that experience in this notion of identifying our angels. All right, and to do that, the prayer experience is called Ignatian contemplation, or just contemplation, and it usually involves a text. It can be a scripture text. It can be, I often do it with a Mary Oliver poem. I like Mary Oliver's poems. You can do it without a text, but your imagination has more specificity when you have a text to deal with, right? And so, unlike the examen, most of the examen, we're not imagining something that didn't happen, we're reimagining something that did happen. Well, Ignatian contemplation invites us to join into a narrative and allow our imagination to create what's going on in that narrative. So I'm going to outline the steps of Ignatian contemplation, then I'll give us an experience of it using John's account of the wedding at Cana, which is it's my favorite passage in the Bible, and I'll explain why as we go through that. So here's what Ignatian contemplation entails. Pick a passage. In this case, we're gonna use a passage from John, and you read the passage a couple of times. And that's just to familiarize yourself with the story, the details of the story, etc. You might even identify a passage or two passages within the story that particularly resonate with you. Okay, so you read the passage, and then if it's a narrative, and in this case it is a narrative, right? You're going to choose a character to imagine the passage through. So in the wedding of Cana, Jesus is part of the story. So you might decide, I'm gonna imagine this story through Jesus' experience, or maybe the disciples, or maybe Mary, or the wine steward, or a guest that isn't even mentioned. You could always be a bystander that's not mentioned that's just observing. Then you read the passage again, more slowly this time, but this time you're conscious of the fact of who you are in the story. And then you take a moment to place yourself, like it's called a composition of place. And it involves asking yourself questions. Okay, if I'm at this wedding, who am I with? What am I wearing? What's it like outside? What's the temperature like? What are the people in the room going to be most concerned about, right? And then what you do is you allow the story to come alive through your imagination. And that's what I will do. I'm going to give you about 7 or 8 minutes of just absolute quiet time, where your imagination, you can let your imagination take the details of the story. And what will sometimes happen is you'll find your imagination taking you into places, having the story take a turn of some sort. So it might be tangentially related to the wedding and the wine, etc., but it might be about something completely different. Allow that to happen. This kind of use of the imagination, for some people, takes some practice. Some people can get into it right away. I find it very accessible. I can get into it right away, but I was one of those students in a class who could have his eyes absolutely attentive on the teacher and have his mind someplace completely different, right? I provide this experience for teachers at prep. I call them a modus meal. I'll invite a group of 10 teachers at a time over to my house for a dinner, and I'll fix dinner and we have wonderful conversation. The majority of the evening is social, but I say, the price you pay, the caveat is you have to engage in a 20-25-minute Ignatian contemplation. And we'll gather, and I'll walk them through a contemplation just like I'm doing with you. And some people will say, boy, I did this last year and I couldn't get into it at all, but I seem to be able to now. Some people will say, my wife included, like I do 4 of these a year, I did before COVID. And my wife will say, I just really struggle. My imagination doesn't want to go down that road. So it's it's a process that will strike people differently. I will say, if you find an inkling of success in this, try it again. Even if you don't, try it again. It might be just something that takes a couple of times to get used to. Okay. So I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to read this passage from the Gospel of John. You don't need to do anything at this point in this, but be attentive. Just listen to it and to what happens. Most of us are probably familiar with it, but whether we are or not, going through it again can always be helpful. So this is the wedding at Cana. This is Jesus' first miracle. 3 days later, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited. When they had run out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no more wine." And Jesus said, "Why do you turn to me? My hour has not yet come." But his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." There were 6 stone water jars standing there. Each could hold 20 to 30 gallons. And Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. "Draw some out now," he told them, "and take it to the steward." They did this. The steward tasted the water, and it had turned into wine. The steward called the bridegroom and said, "People generally serve their best wine first and keep the cheaper sort until the guests have had plenty to drink. But you have kept this best wine until now." So that's the story. And here's what I would invite you to do. I'm going to give you a half a minute or so to think about, who will you choose to be in the story? Again, you can be someone that's named: the steward, bridegroom, Mary, one of the disciples, Jesus, or someone that's not named, a guest at the wedding, somebody that's there observing. Okay, I'm going to read the story again. I'll read it a little bit more slowly. And now you're listening to this story kind of through the lens of the character that you've chosen. "3 days later, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee. The mother of Jesus was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited. When they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no more wine." Jesus said, "Why do you turn to me? My hour has not yet come." But his mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you to do." There were 6 stone water jars standing there, and each could hold 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the water jars with water." And they filled them to the brim. "Draw some out now," he told them, "and take it to the steward." They did this. And when the steward tasted the water, it had turned into wine. The steward called the bridegroom and said, "People generally serve the best wine first and keep the cheaper sort till the guests have had plenty to drink. But you have kept the best wine until now." So now take about 30 seconds just to put yourself in that place. Who are you? What might you be wearing? Who's around you? What's it look like? What's the tone of the gathering? And I will give you about 8 minutes of just quiet, where I invite you to close your eyes, let your imagination walk through this narrative and see where it takes you. That's really interesting. So I want to talk a little bit about why I chose that. And I love your responses. This is my favorite passage. And one of the reasons it's my favorite passage is it shows Jesus as human. He's very human in this. Like, he's not sure what he's supposed to do. I mean, he seems like he's sure, but apparently he's not, because he does the opposite of what he thinks he's sure he's not going to do. Right. And I find anytime I can picture the humanity of Jesus, it makes Jesus more accessible for me, which means it makes me feel like I can more be like, not like Jesus, but like my best self, right? But the real reason I picked it is this is a passage in which Mary is Jesus's angel. Our angels invite and encourage us to be who we are, who we can be. This passage begins, the first line in the passage, after telling you where it is, where they are, is the mother of Jesus was there. The mother is mentioned before Jesus is. The mother is there, and so are Jesus and the disciples. She's a key role. She's the one that turns to Jesus and says, "There is no more wine." I leave out the word woman. I know Tessa brought that. I brought that in. I loved it, right? He does say, "Woman, my time has not yet come." And we can't read that today in a way that isn't belittling, right? There's all kinds of commentary out there about how it might mean something else. But he turns and says, "My time has not yet come." And what they don't tell us in the passage, what what John does not tell us, is Mary's reaction. Because there's no doubt in my mind that Mary shoots, at the bare minimum, Mary shoots Jesus a look that says exactly what Tessa just mentioned, right? Mary doesn't know all of what's to become of her son. She doesn't know that he's going to die on a cross and rise from the dead. But she does know something of who he is and what he's capable of. And her response to him says, "You may not think your time has come yet, but you better get started along that road." And he does. This is his first miracle. If he doesn't perform this miracle, well, some miracle had to be his first. And this is his first. It's at a social gathering. It's, you know, as much as a miracle can be, it's low stakes. And he gets that nudge from Mary. Along with the look. I don't know what the look is, right? But parents have that look, and I'll say especially mothers know the look to give that communicates all that needs to be communicated. Jesus understands it, Jesus follows it, and it allows him to act out of the divinity that is within him. And that's what angels do for us. They help us, they allow us to act out of the divinity which is within each of us. Oftentimes, those angels are our students. Okay, so I'm back to share my screen real quick. This is what we're going to have you go into room for about 10 minutes again, 12 minutes, let's say 12 minutes to reflect on these questions. Who's been an angel for you? Describe a time when you were inspired, invited, nudged into your best self as a teacher. Oftentimes that's students, right? Those are experiences for me that do that. Like that student I talked about who came and talked to me about his aunt. That's an angel moment for me. Now, again, it's not anything I would ever wish for him to experience, but it gave me a sense of, how to be for him. Okay. So you can answer that or describe a time when you helped a student realize what they were capable of. All right. You might do that for a colleague as well. Teachers are very reluctant to look at number 2 because we don't like to think of ourselves as angels for our students, right? But we are. We need to be. We're invited to be. We should be, right? And that nudge, that invitation comes in different forms for each of our different students. So I will put these questions in the chat. And I'll give you, just a minute to look at those questions. And then I'll invite Emily to put us in a meeting room for, let's say, 12 minutes, where just talk with one another about your experiences of the angels in your lives who've helped you, to be who it is that you're invited and called to be. Okay. Emily, thank you. So when we talk about identifying our angels, like I've talked about this most of today, about that divine tapestry that we have being a source of life, which really can be, right? It's life-giving, it's consolation, etc. And sometimes that doesn't always mean it's the happiest choice, right? So we talk about sometimes we are invited into our purpose, right? The angels that in our lives that maybe you just spoke about. And sometimes through prayer, we can be invited into that which gives us life. But sometimes we're challenged to do our purpose. And it doesn't seem like an invitation as much as a challenge. And that can be through angels, circumstances, again, through prayer, right? There are, as much as I'm sure we all love teaching, there are parts of teaching or being a teacher that don't fill us with consolation or are as joy-filled. I'm thinking of a stack of essays awaiting my grading when I say that, and yet I also think I'm not as conscious of this, right? But when I stop to think about it, well, when I get those papers graded and I hand them back, it is an opportunity for students to become better writers, and that's a good thing. It's not one of the joyous parts of teaching, right? We've all had that student where we felt like, you know what would be really good is if I got in touch with this this student's parents and let them know what's going on, because maybe together we can figure out a way to help this along. But sometimes those conversations are difficult and we're reluctant to make that call. All right. I also think of the opportunities to take on tasks that don't give us life in the way that teaching does, right? Teachers are oftentimes asked to take on additional things, especially in our Catholic schools where we don't have the resources to maybe to hire as many people as are needed. I think sometimes of when I was asked if I would take on the principal's role a second time, and I had to think and pray about that a lot. Like I knew what I wanted to do. I wanted to stay in teaching, but I also prayed about it and thought, okay, sometimes it's not the invitation. Sometimes it's the challenge. Sometimes it's not the opportunity to be, to feel best in what we do, but to do best given all circumstances. And I thought at the time it was good for the school. And in some ways it was probably good for me to take on that role again. And the only reason I bring it up is I think it's important for us to recognize, as we talk about what we do as being sacred. And in this case, I would say what we do as teachers, but even larger in our life, what we do can sometimes be difficult. Doesn't mean it's not the right choice. The example I have of this is this is another one of my favorite passages is Jesus in the garden at Gethsemane, right, where it's just before he's crucified, and he goes into the garden to pray, and he says, "My Father, if this cup cannot pass by without my drinking it, your will be done." And that's Jesus's way of turning to God and saying, I really don't want to go through this. Is there a way that I could not go through this? But if this is what's best, I'll do it. I'm fine doing it, right? I think again, the passages where I can see the humanity of Jesus are the ones I resonate with. Jesus accepts what is the best thing for him to do, what is the thing that fulfills his woven divine tapestry, but that doesn't mean that's what he wants to do. It doesn't mean that's what he is going to bring him the most joy in his life. Okay, so that's all I would say about kind of identifying our angels for that. At this point, let me just say this. We didn't take a break after the first session, which was really long, and I would say this: we have a short session and then some wrap up, where you do evaluations, clock hours. We're going to find out some more about some wonderful programs the ISC is putting on. My question to you is, would it be helpful for you to take a 5-minute break? Sometimes bouncing into and out of small groups can feel a little bit like a break, so people don't need it. But if it would be helpful, we can easily take a 5, 6, 7-minute break. So what I'd ask you to do is, if you go down to reactions, you should have the opportunity to hit a green check mark, yes, I want a break, or a red X, no, I don't need a break, and I'd rather this session end sooner in the day. So I'm going to invite you to check that, and we can take a look at what people are voting. I'm seeing an overwhelming desire for no break. Few people that do want to break. I'll say this. I'm going to invite you. If you need a few minutes, by all means, go ahead. I will tell you what this next section that we're going to talk about is. It kind of praying with a purpose. Like, what kind of prayer is out there that would be really awesome for a teacher to have in his or her arsenal of prayers. Okay, so we'll do that. If you need to take a couple minutes, go right ahead. I'm going to start this out with I'm going to read this prayer to you. I'm not intending this for us to enter this session in prayer. I'm going to read the prayer because I think it's applicable to what we're talking about here. It's called a beautiful advice prayer. I've used this a few times. I've used this with parent groups where I've adapted it and changed it, where I'm trying to kind of gently give them a message as well. I think you'll get a sense of that as I read this. It's called the beautiful advice prayer, and this is the way it goes. It says, I asked God to take away my pain, but God said, no, it's not for me to take away, but for you to give it up. So I asked God to make my child whole, make her smarter, more successful, more athletic. God said, no, her spirit is whole. All of those other things are temporary. So I asked God to grant me patience. God said, no, patience is a byproduct of tribulations. It isn't granted, it's earned. Then I asked God to give me happiness. God said, no, I give you blessing. Happiness is up to you. Exasperated, I asked God to spare me pain, and God said, no, suffering draws you apart from worldly cares and brings you closer to me. So I asked God for all things that I might enjoy life. God said, no, I will give you life so that you may enjoy all things. And finally, I asked God, help me to love others as much as you love me. And God said, at last, you have the idea. I read this to you because I've done a lot of talks about prayer and about spirituality, but I would be less than honest with you if I didn't say, sometimes I really struggle with prayer. I struggle with how to do prayer best, what prayer means, how prayer can be successful, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm going to share with you a quote that really struck me. I like this quote quite a bit. And it's from Julia Spencer Fleming, author, kind of mystery author. It's a really good series, the first one of which is In the Bleak Midwinter. Her protagonist, her lead character, is an Episcopalian minister, and she gets herself into some trouble and et cetera, et cetera. But she had a line in this book. It says, I believe that prayer focuses our human thoughts and energies, sends them to people we are praying for. I believe that helps in ways we can't yet understand. I believe that God hears our prayers and cherishes them. I believe he answers by sending his spirit, giving us strength and peace and insight. I think that's a wonderful idea around prayer. And I think for a kind of prayer in the broadest sense, that's what I try to keep in mind. But there's a type of prayer that I've always wondered about, and it's the prayer, when Jesus says, knock and the door will be answered, ask and you will receive. I want to know what kind of prayer I can ask for that I'm guaranteed of, right? And when I remember I'm sure it's not the first time I heard that passage, but the first time I remember that passage, I was 15 years old. I was living for the summer in Wisconsin, working with with a gentleman on a 240-acre sweet corn farm. It's the greatest summer experience a 15-year-old can have. And this was the first year that this land had been plowed and planted. So we did not yet have a well. We didn't have an irrigation system. So we were dependent on the weather to get this corn watered. And we hit a streak of dry, hot days. And the corn was not looking great. So we went to Mass on Sundays. We went into Mass, and I heard this gospel passage where Jesus promises, ask and you will receive, knock and the door will be answered. And I thought, it's not a parable. Jesus doesn't liken it to anything. He doesn't say you might. it's a promise. And I heard this and I thought, this is great. I'm going to pray for rain for our corn. And then when the petitions, the prayers of the faithful came around, the very first prayer that they made from the pulpit was, God, please make it sunny so that we can have our parish picnic. And I thought, I don't know how this prayer thing works. Like, I'm totally befuddled by it. I first thought, well, does God get 60 prayers from farmers and 100 prayers from parishioners that want to enjoy a parish picnic? And that can't be right. God's not a democratic God. And yet I kept going back to the passage and thinking, it's not figurative language. He says to his disciples, I promise you, if you ask for it, you'll get it. So I couldn't make sense of it. I didn't make sense of it. Fast forward 10 years later, I'm 25 years old. I've got this teaching job at St. Ignatius, and I'm a basketball coach. And I know it's the right thing to do to pray before a game. But I think to myself, well, what should we pray for? Well, same dilemma. We're in an all Catholic schools league. I go, I can't pray for victory because the guys in the locker room right next door are praying for the exact same thing. And you know what? They got more students than we do. So if it's democratic, we're done. So I kept thinking, well, what could I meaningfully ask these players to pray for? Like, I want them to have a positive experience of prayer. So I went for a while with, well, we'll pray for no injury. I thought that's safe, that's good. But of course there were injuries. And then I had this experience. I'm horribly allergic to poison oak. And I remember getting poison oak once. And I would pray not to get it. And then once I'd get it, I'd pray to get over it, And I remember coming out the other end of poison oak, where you start to feel good and the misery, though, just the horrible misery is behind you. And I remember being so thankful for my health. And I thought, you know what? That's maybe why you don't pray not to get injured, because sometimes those tribulations are the things that bring us closer to God. So I thought, I don't know what to pray for before games. So I would muddle through some things, right? And then, it was close to 10 years after that, I was still teaching, I was still coaching. I was raised by my aunt and uncle. And my aunt got cancer, and she was dying of cancer. And I would pray wholeheartedly that she would recover from her cancer. And I agree with the Julia Spencer Fleming quote. Like, I think those prayers are valuable. I think they're heard. I think there's power in them. And I have no idea exactly how they work, but they're not the kind that you get guaranteed. So then I went, my aunt was not recovering. So I went to prayers that would relieve her from her pain. I thought that was, again, a safer, more likely prayer to be heard and granted. Those prayers weren't granted. And then my final prayer was this. I prayed that I would be mindful of the gift that she had been in my life and to enjoy my time with her. And that prayer was answered. I mean, it was answered in a huge way for me, in a way that just wasn't, I want this to happen. Like, it was a wonderful, wonderful experience and some final moments. And it became clear to me at that time, and as I learned more about Ignatian spirituality, which happened at about that time, it became really, really clear to me what Jesus meant when Jesus said, if you ask for it, it will be granted to you. I am not a theologian, and your local theologian may disagree with me wholeheartedly, but this is my belief. Anytime we ask for something that is really an ask for us to live out that goal we talked about at the very beginning, our goal in life is to live with God forever. If I ask for something that helps that come true, I am always guaranteed that I will be granted it. Always. I will always be guaranteed that I'm granted that prayer. Let me share my screen with you, and I'll hopefully make that, then I'll bring that into how that might be helpful for us as teachers. Okay. So God grants those prayers that are in line with our goal in life, to be with God. What does that mean for me as a teacher? This was for me gold, and I hope it's of some value to you. Ignatius has a prayer that he calls the particular examen. It's like the examen, except it's very specific. I'm not going to lead you through it because it would be different for each of us, what we chose. I'm going to explain it's a very simple process. Then I'm going to give you a few minutes to just reflect on how it might apply to you rather than going into a large group or a small group rather. So here's what you do in a particular examen. You identify a trait or an area in your life you want to improve. I'll tell you, for me as a young teacher, that meant praying to be more patient. I knew that I would be a better teacher for my students if I was more patient. Okay. Sometimes I pray to be more generous of spirit. Sometimes I pray to be more present to my students' needs. And oftentimes that's needs outside of class, right? Like, really, what do they need from me? I know what they need from me in terms of an English teacher. What do they need from me that will help them most? So you identify this trait that you want to improve. And then in the morning, let's say I'm going to do this for 5 days. I'm going to work on being more patient this week. Okay. So each morning, I'm going to pray for the grace to improve in that area. So let's say I'll stick with patience. Each morning, I'm going to get up. I'm going to pray for the grace to be more patient with my students. I might even pray to be more patient with my colleagues. I think oftentimes we're not patient with our colleagues too. I might even use my imagination. I might imagine the day, my interactions of the day, what that would be like if I were more patient. I'll tell you where this really helped me. When I was the principal and I had to deal with really angry parents about sometimes their son or daughter being suspended or expelled or having a run-in with a teacher, I would oftentimes think, okay, I need to be patient in that meeting. Like, if I ratchet it up and meet them where they are, we're going to be in an argument. How about if I can be patient and stay calm? Maybe that invites them to be a little calmer. So I would imagine, okay, what is this conference with the parent going to look like? I like to think it helped, and I really do believe it did. It doesn't mean that parents always calm down for me, right? So I'm going to pray for that each morning. I'm going to pray for the grace to improve in that area. And the last thing is, at the end of the day, you just walk through your day, again, imagining what your day was, and evaluate my actions, my interactions with others, and my thoughts in light of that trait. Was I patient when that student did something that irked me? Was I patient? Was I patient in thought? Was I patient in action? If I wasn't, again, it's not to do this so as to, admonish myself, beat myself up for it. But it does help me in that I recognize it, so that when I'm praying for the grace and imagining the next time it happens, I'm more likely to be patient. Okay, that's praying with a purpose. That's a particular examen. I have found that really helpful as a teacher, as a coach. I've found it really helpful as a parent as well. And I hope you do. I hope you do as well. Here's what I would invite you to do. I'm going to give you about 5 minutes on your own, where it's just going to be quiet time. Maybe you'd like to think about this. Maybe you jot some things down. I find it helpful to write things down, whatever means works best for you. I'm going to invite you to identify some traits, some areas, some behaviors that you might use this particular examen to pray for. And then kind of which of the traits, if you identify some, which are most important to you, right? And is there, do you have some desire? Maybe you start off your week next week and you decide, you know what, this week I'm going to pray to be more generous of spirit with my students. Okay. Think about how might your interactions and relationships with students change as a result of using this particular examen. Okay, so I'm going to give you, I'll give you about 5 minutes to reflect on this, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap up our time together. Okay. Okay. As we wrap up, I'm gonna share this with you. I used to share this with teachers at a faculty meeting, but I don't lead faculty meetings anymore. But I think it's called The Lesson, and it's rooted in the Beatitudes. It's not really a prayer. I think it's kind of clever, and I think teachers appreciate it. And it goes like this. Then Jesus took his disciples up a mountain, up the mountain, and gathering them around him, he taught them, saying, "Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are the meek. Blessed are they that mourn. Blessed are the merciful. Blessed are they who thirst after righteousness. Blessed are they that are persecuted. Blessed are they who suffer. Be glad and rejoice, for your reward is great in heaven. Remember what I'm telling you." And then Simon Peter said, "Do we have to write this down?" And Andrew said, "Are we supposed to know this?" James asked, "Will we be tested on this?" John said, "The other disciples didn't have to learn this." And Matthew said, "When do we get out of here?" Judas said, "What does this have to do with real life?" And then finally, one of the Pharisees who was present asked to see Jesus' lesson plan and inquired of Jesus his terminal objectives in the cognitive domain. And Jesus wept. I think I actually really like the last line because it helps me. It reminds me that I'm not wrong in prioritizing what I prioritize, right? That Jesus weeps at those questions, but they're the questions we get sometimes. Okay. Thank you for being present this afternoon. It's been wonderful being with you. I hope some of this has been helpful for you. It's been wonderful working with Emily. We've got a couple of things that we would like to share with you at the very end of this presentation. Let's see if I can. There. So one thing I want to just make sure you have is there's my contact information. If you'd like any of the resources, any information, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out. I'm at mbarmore@cprep.org. Anything you want to ask, if you just want to talk about what we've gone over today, etc. I've probably been to 6 or 7 different schools in the Puget Sound area, Catholic schools, and done some faculty staff retreats. If that would be helpful, did a Myers-Briggs workshop for an admin team that I thought was interesting. I'm also putting together an 8-day Ignatian retreat podcast. If it's not finished, but if you're interested in something like that and want to just leave me your contact information when I finish that, that's fine. Okay. And I'm going to turn it over to Emily.
Thanks, Matt. I just wanted to share a few upcoming events at the Ignatian Spirituality Center. First, I just invite you to check out our website, ignatiancenter.org, for upcoming programs. And there's lots of resources there as well on just Ignatian spirituality in general. So different links to resources on the examen and different prayer resources that Matt said throughout this presentation. So we have about a presentation or retreat a month, and these are two of the ones that are coming up most quickly for the ISC. So I just wanted to alert your attention to them. The first is a Spirit and Justice Conversation Circle, engaging the spiritual work of racial justice. It's a month of meditations. And we'll be doing this sort of in line with Lent from Ignatius of Loyola with a lens of anti-racism work. And the other upcoming retreat we do, this is our 25th year, I believe, Matt, doing it, is the Novena of Grace. So it's a novena during Lent, March 8th through 16th, and we'll be having it at St. Joe's. And we'll also be doing audio recordings online as well. And the next slide just shares another resource that we have through the ISC is a spiritual direction seek and find service. So one of the other things that Ignatius was really big on was having a companion, a spiritual companion and conversation partner. And spiritual directors are a wonderful way to engage in this. I'm sure many of you have even partaken or maybe spiritual directors yourself. But we do have a service on our website that helps match people with spiritual directors trained in the Ignatian tradition. So I just invite you to check out those resources as well. And then I just wanted to say a special thank you to Matt for bringing all of his wonderful stories and wisdom to this space, and for all of you for engaging and participating. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. Appreciate it very much. Yes, and I would highly recommend any programs the ISC put on are guaranteed really high quality programs. Okay. And then here's the presentation wrap up. There's information there about how to find or claim your clock hours. If you have questions about that, you can call Lisa O'Leary. There's her contact information there. And I would ask that before you leave, would you please fill out the evaluation? Your feedback on this program and all programs will help the Archdiocese provide the best kind of programming for you. Okay. Once you finish with all of these things, and you get the information you need about clock hours, et cetera, and complete the evaluation, we're done. We have nothing more to share other than to say thank you. And we really appreciate you joining us today. If you have any questions, please let us know. Okay. Thank you again.